Earlier this year, swimming fans rejoiced as it was announced that the 450s would finally be added to the Olympic Games. Not only did this finally mean that the Olympic and World Championships would share the same individual program of events, but it also meant sprinters would finally have equality with the other swimmers. Well, that's where we were sadly wrong. This week, World Aquatics have announced potentially the most bogus Olympic qualifying system I've ever seen just for the stroke 50s. Today we're going to break down how the new events qualify for the Olympic Games and why it's a massive letdown. From the 2028 LA Olympics, we will finally have 17 individual men's and 17 individual women races. If we cast the gaze all the way back to the 1952 Games, there were just 5 individual men's races and 4 for the women. We saw gradual and random event additions over the next 16 years, but 1968 saw a big overhaul and increase of 5 events along with equality between the men and women with 12 individual races each. It also gave us just one program difference with the men swimming the 1500 while the women swam the 8. The program would remain unadulterated for the next 20 years when the 53 was finally added in 1988 and another 32 years when we finally got the men's 800 and the women's 1500, giving us 14 identical events for each gender. The bottom line is that for 52 years we saw just 2 individual events added to the Olympic schedule, yet in the last 6 years we've seen an addition of 4. Fans of other sports are quick to complain. Swimming has too many races. In neither sport it's possible to get a Phelpsian 8 gold medals. A track athlete did once get 6 medals, but that was back in 1924, while in the 1980 Games, a gymnast pulled the impossible clean sweep of 8 medals, winning one in every single event the sport had to offer. In cycling, the most medals since 1904 was Chris Hoy with 3. The bottom line is that while swimming's 41 gold medals on offer is less than athletics 45, the 53 is always going to have a lot more in common than the 1500, than a 100-meter sprint and the javelin. But swimming is revolutionizing and individualizing at an incredibly fast pace. Most of the world's best swimmers are doubling down on just 1 or 2 individual events, otherwise they get spread too thin, becoming a jack of all trades or a master of none. Right now, this is much more noticeable on the men's side, but it's still starting to be apparent on the women as well. There are of course anomalies to these rules of the likes of Leon Marchand and Summer McIntosh, but much fewer than 20 years ago where the best swimmers just could win whatever they wanted to do. Think Phelps, Lochte and all of these sort of guys. All of this is basically to say, even as a swimming fan, I don't think it is fair to add more events just for the same swimmers to win them. It wouldn't be fun at all if the same 17 men or women shared all 17 of the individual podiums, and it would not be fair to add 3 more events with the expectation that someone who's going to gain an additional medal is supposed to see a completely new, unique winner. Otherwise, in track and field, we may as well have the 100 meters, the 101 meters, the 102 meters, and so on. You get the point. I think an event should only be added if it will take a unique skill set to be won. Due to the heavy specialization in our sport now, if implemented correctly, the addition of the 50 butterfly, backstroke and breaststroke that we will see at the LA Olympics will provide us with unique medalists. Athletes who without these events would certainly leave the Olympics empty-handed if they were to qualify whatsoever. In years gone by, you would assume that the best 50 freestylers were also the best at the 100 and vice versa, but recently advancements in training have left these being massively different events. At the 2024 Paris Games, the entire men's podium in the 53 didn't even take part in the 100, and the entire final in the 50 did not make the 100 final. But right now, this phenomenon we only see in the freestyle races because of the lack of the 450s at the Olympics in previous years meant if you were naturally a far swimmer, your best bet was to train for the 100, even if the 50 would come more naturally to you. You would then just treat the 50 as a side event, a byproduct of your 100 training. It's the reason that the top 250 freestyles at the recent Singapore World Championships didn't even swim the 100 free, but the top 2 in the 50 fly were the same top 2 as in the 100 fly. In fact, the last time we saw someone truly take the 50 fly as far as they could without any Olympic ambition was Andrei Govrov in 2018, where he set a world record that has been largely untouched for the last 7 years. All of this is to say now swimmers would have real Olympic incentive to actually prioritise the 50s instead of swimming up to the 100 because there's more opportunity. That was until World Aquatics stepped in. For as long as I remember, the way to qualify for the Olympics was equal across all events and pretty simple. World Aquatics put out an A and a B time which represented automatic qualification and consideration. If you get an A cut, you can be entered without hesitation into the Olympics. With a B cut, you may or may not get an invite from World Aquatics to swim that event at the end of the qualifying window. On top of that, there is a limit of 2 swimmers per event per nation. For Paris, the A cut was the time that finished 16th at the Tokyo Games, but for LA it will be even harder, with it being the 14th seed time from the Paris Games. The seed time from the 14th is generally much faster than what ended up coming 14th. The B cut will be a percentage of that A time. Of course, each national federation will have its own rules and selection criteria that can be as steep or transparent as they want. Nations like the US have full faith that they will have at least 2 swimmers achieve the A cut in each event. Consequently, the selection criteria on the surface at least is very simple. They have a trials event and the top 2 in each event get selected for the Olympics. On the other end of the spectrum, smaller nations where they do not anticipate many swimmers to get the A cut whatsoever basically allow their swimmers to achieve the A cut at any meet in the qualifying period and guarantee them selection. Basically, they put 0 extra barriers up to what World Aquatics policies are. I see this with nations I've worked with like Estonia and Hong Kong. They want to maximise the chances to get as many swimmers as they can at the games, and I'm all for this. Then you have the middle grounds, nations like GB and Australia. It isn't as clean cut as everyone who gets top 2 at their trials will go, because they might not both get the A cut. But they can't have vote forward to have a free-for-all of anyone who gets an A cut across the qualifying period, which is over a year long, could just go to the Olympics. There's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't work. Now, in my opinion, the smartest play for these nations would be to have a trials meet and say if you get top 2 at the trials and meet World Aquatics A cut and B cut policies, you are selected. But for some reason, these countries have their own steeper qualifying so they can have more discretion over their selection. Their justifications, they want to take swimmers with podium potential. But what that ends up meaning is that swimmers could be top 2 in their nation with the World Aquatics A cut and watch the Olympics from a TV back home where only 1 representative from their nation is competing. Anyhow, this is a rant for another day. Maybe I'll address this in another video. There are 2 additional methods for qualifying to the Olympics: getting selected for a relay and going as a relay only swimmer, or a universality spot. Universality spots are invited to developing nations who have 0 swimmers with official cuts. They then get to swim 1 male and 1 female swimmer in whatever events they want. These nations normally invite their swimmers with their highest FINA points. When the 50 butterfly, breaststroke and backstroke were announced for the LA Games, everyone anticipated they would receive their own A and B cuts, allowing the best formed sprinters in the world to gain qualification for these new events based on their merit in them precise exact events. Well, that was far from reality. Instead, we have a system which leads to exactly the most feared when adding new events. We simply have new gold medals that will most likely be won by someone who's already winning medals. And this all comes down to the new qualifying policy. World Aquatics have set up 2 ways to qualify for the new events. The first is brand new and radical. In October of 2027, around 9 months before the Olympics, World Aquatics will host 3 World Cup legs as per usual. But this time, each leg will have a special 50 qualifying tournament. I guess we can presume that leg 1 will be the 50 fly, leg 2 the 50 back, and leg 3 the 50 breast. Each leg is a 3-day meet, and on day 1 there'll be morning heats where the top 32 will swim in a quarterfinal that evening. The top 16 then will advance to a semi-final on day 2, and finally the top 8 will take on a final on the final night, where the top 6 of them 8 swimmers will be qualified for the LA Olympic Games. Cut and dry, they get an invite, and if their nation chooses to select them, they get to go to the Olympics. So far, so good. These World Cups will be a lot of fun. They have so much more purpose than any other World Cup in history, and I think these will not only have a great turnout, but be fast meets as well. But the issue, and boy is it a big one, is that this is the first, last, and only way you can qualify for the stroke 50s at the LA Olympics based on how you swim in the stroke 50s. What? Come 7th at this meet and have a massive breakout over the next 7 months. Break the world record, beat everyone, go unbeaten. It doesn't matter. You can't swim the event at the Olympics. You see how this is a big issue, right? So how can you still qualify to the 50s? Surely they won't just be 6 swimmers in each race at the Olympics. Well, of course not. If you qualify in any of the other 14 individual events that have A and B cuts and meet an allegedly soft time standard, then you are eligible to swim the 50 at the Games. So basically, qualify for the usual events and just add the 50 as a bonus. Obviously, this is going to be managed by each nation's selection criteria, and I would imagine it would be something along the lines of the top 2 in the 100 fly will swim the 50 fly, and so on. Alternatively, a nation could make a ranking of each 50 once they've selected a team, and then invite one at a time the top swimmers if they want to swim the 50, just in the case where the 50 freestyle on the team is quicker at the 50 fly than the 100 fly swimmer because he's a more sprint orientated swimmer or she's a more sprint orientated swimmer. But again, this is for each national selection committee to work out. This has led to some major alarm bells going off in my head, and I want to walk through some realistic scenarios we could see happen. Right now, Russian sprinter Oleg Kostin is ranked 10th in the world in the men's 50 butterfly with his time of this season 22.85. He's also the 7th fastest 50 fly performer of all time with his PB of 22.62. Oleg could very possibly win an Olympic medal in the 50 fly. He is a multiple-time world champion swimmer, but has never qualified for the Olympics due to being an out-and-out form sprinter. The sort of individual that would have been overjoyed to see the 50s added to the Olympic schedule. Finally, he could be an Olympian. Now, hopefully he will come top 6 of the World Cup and then Russia decided to take him to LA, but just imagine he finishes 7th, just hundredths off behind 6th. The reality is that he is a swimmer you want competing at the Olympics, competing for a medal, challenging for the win, but that's it. 9 months out of the games, he could be out. Now, he could try and qualify for the 50 free, an event which he's never raced at any level, or even the 100 fly, the obvious step being a 50 fly swimmer, but it's an event where his PB would probably struggle to make the final at the Russian trials, and it's a far cry from the A Cup. When it comes to the games, the reality is he would then watch 2 slower Russians swim the 50 fly, just adding up the numbers while he was back home, not once again being an Olympian. This is just a quick example to illustrate what an issue this is. A lot can change between October 2027 and July 2028, and I can almost assure you that there will be at least one swimmer that finished 7th at a World Cup who could and maybe would have won a medal when it comes to the Olympic Games. The next major issue is that national federations, most notably the USA, are going to struggle to make selection policies that include these World Cups. Now, World Aquatics' main reasoning for these strange qualifying rules are due to the Olympics actually taking away the total amount of swimmers that can compete at the LA Games. You see, the IOC actually announces how many spots there are for each sport. The most spots swimming has ever had was 900 back at the Rio Olympic Games when there was only 26 individual events. But now in 2028, with 34 individual events, we've had our swimming numbers cut from 900 to 830. 8 more events, 70 less swimmers. Something has to give, right? Because of this, national teams have not been awarded more roster spots for LA, being stuck with the typical 26 spots per gender. Historically, this has only ever been an issue for one nation, the USA, and this has even led to relay alternatives having to be sacrificed from their policy. But with more specialization in swimming, meaning less swimmers are qualifying for large teams like the US in multiple events, no longer do we have a Phelps get 5 individuals, a Lochte get 4, a Tyler Clary get 3, a Pearsall get 3, something we may have to give, especially on the men's side, when USA already took 26 to the Paris Games without the free 50s being added. Enter scenario 2. In each of the men's 50s at the World Cups, 2 of the top 6 are Americans. Completely plausible because we know that America are the #1 nation in swimming. Americans like Michael Andrew and Van Matthias, who have dedicated themselves solely to swimming the 50s and the 50s fast. 2 unique American men end up finishing the top 6, meaning a total of 6 American individuals have qualified for the LA Olympics, a home Olympics, an historic Olympic for them. That is 6 of the 26 roster spots already taken up, with 14 of the 17 individual races still yet to be selected. And, of course, relays to be assembled. Come the US trials in June 2028 and none of these swimmers make an additional event, someone has to be cut. Now, just to really explain this possibility, let's say the US selection committee just decide to ignore the World Cups. It adds too much complication. They say the top 2 spots in 100 fly, back and breast, will gain you the 50 and 100 Olympic spots. It's worked for them in the past with the World Championships. Anyway, World Aquatics have confirmed that World Cup invites will not be backfilled. So now, instead of the measly 6 swimmers who have outright qualified for the 50 events, we end up with just 4 of them actually getting to swim. 4 swimmers at the Olympics who actually qualified for the 50 by swimming the 50. The rest of the participants got it in some other way. Both of these scenarios deny an enrichment to sprinting like I had really hoped for. An enrichment where people can train correctly for the 50s, not having to worry about aerobic training and volume, instead simply trying to maximize speed in their one event. An enrichment that would allow swimmers to continue their careers well into their 30s, being able to have families and external careers because you can train at a lot less and still be at the top with these events. Now, if you're a swimmer who wants to qualify for the Olympics, your best bet, like always, is to keep training for the 100 with the 50 as some sort of sad afterthought. Had the new 50s received A and B cuts like the rest of the events, I was certain that like with the 50 and 100 free, the podiums between the 50s and 100s and all the strokes would be completely unique. But now, the reality is that I expect that in the podiums of the 50 and 100 fly, back, breast, they will be shared and perhaps in some cases even identical. I do have a few other thoughts that I want to share with you. The first is with the World Cup as a qualifying meet. For most major meets like the World Championships and the Olympic Games, each national federation will select a team. They fund that team to go compete. Depending on how far the location of the competition is from them, they will set up a holding camp for as long as 3 weeks before the meet to adjust the climate and time zone. All of this gives the athletes the best chance of swimming at their very best, their very fastest, when they get to the major meet. World Cups are very scarcely funded by a national team, even less so by the major countries, the Australias, the GBs, and the Americas. On top of that, they would never have a swimmer have a lengthy holding camp for one. You see where I'm going with this? We're not going to have teams set up the best possibility of swimming fast at these World Cups like you would at, say, the World Champs. Now, if a national team was to fund swimmers to go to this event, who would they fund? Their 2 fastest in each 50? Their 10 fastest? Will they have a trials to qualify for the World Cup where the top 2 get funded to go? Or will they just send their 2 representatives from the 2027 World Championships just months before these World Cups? Then that would end up making the 2027 World Championship trials a sort of early Olympic trials for the 50s. Or will they simply say, if you want to go, crack on, enter, fund it and try and qualify? I think some type of the latter is the most likely scenario, and that brings me to my next issue. The World Cups will be in Europe. For the European nations, that is great. No jet lag, no holding camp needed. Just rock up and race fast. But what about the Australians, the Asians, the Americans? Will they not only have to self-fund these meets, but also the 2-week holding camp they'll need to get on a level pegging a fair playing field with all the Europeans? There's plenty more of these logistical problems, such as will the swimmers choose to train straight from the World Champs to the World Cups without a break? If so, that basically means they will have no break from 2026 to the Olympics 2 years later. That would be absurd in its own right. What if they can't even afford to get to the World Cup? These aren't cheap flights from, say, Australia to Europe and then all the accommodation on top. Swimmers aren't very well paid. And if so, will World Aquatics fund certain swimmers' attendance? In the past, they have selected like 10 to 12 swimmers who they fund for the World Cups and even get them better hotels and food than the rest of the athletes competing against them. How is that fair? I know I've spent this whole video complaining, but I truly want what's best for the sport, the viewers, and of course, and most importantly, the swimmers themselves. I want every major meet to be set up to swim fast and have the fastest swimmers in the world swimming the fastest times. I want it to be the most competitive it can possibly be. I want training methods to evolve, which of course will mean world records are crushed, and I want miracles and upsets to happen on the world stage and drama to ensue. But with just 830 swimmers allowed to compete at the Olympics, how could we possibly have A and B cuts for the newer 50 events like for all the others? Surely something is just not going to be able to add up if we were to do that. But the reality is, I think we can have A and B cuts really easily. The A cut is literally the 14th fastest time achieved in the last Olympic qualifying period. With growth in the sport, let's anticipate 16 swimmers were to get each A cut in each event. Let's even play it safer and say there's 20 swimmers who end up getting each A cut. 20 swimmers at each of the 34 events adds up to 680 swimmers qualifying. That means we've got 150 spots left for the B cut invites, for relay only swimmers, and of course the universality swimmers that are so important to World Aquatics. This is of course not even taking into account the amount of swimmers who end up getting double ups and overlaps in their events, meaning that in reality there'll be more than 150 spots possible. By Limiting the numbers of the new 50s to just 6 qualifying instead of say 20 by using A cuts, we are basically affording at least 84 extra spots to the less competitive athletes at this meet. I'm not saying this is a protest against swimmers getting on B cuts or universality spots, and I want them to get their moments. In fact, I'm all for it, but it's clearly is not one or the other. It's not black and white. We can have equality over all individual events. We can have the fastest swimmers in the world along with the universality swimmers. We can have our cake and eat it.